she looked like an ordinary cargo pilot. Nobody suspected her secret past. But when engines exploded at 33,000 feet with 300 people aboard, her hands moved like a fighter pilot. The F-22 jets watching couldn't believe it, until they discovered who she really was. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The pre-dawn darkness over Travis Air Force Base carried the familiar sounds of heavy machinery and diesel engines as Captain Rachel Morgan completed her pre-flight walk-around inspection of the massive C-17 Globemaster III. The four-engine strategic airlifter sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its gray paint still wet with morning dew. Rachel moved through her checklist with practiced efficiency, her flight suit showing the worn patches of someone who had logged thousands of hours in cargo operations. At 42 years old, with her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and reading glasses perched on her nose for the inspection paperwork, she looked exactly like what everyone assumed she was, a solid, dependable cargo pilot who had worked her way up through the civilian freight industry before taking military transport contracts. "Morning, Captain Morgan," called out Senior Airman Davis, one of the loadmasters supervising the cargo operations. "We've got a full house today. Medical supplies, vehicle parts, ammunition, and 287 personnel heading to Ramstein. Another 13 crew and support staff makes it exactly 300 souls on board." Rachel nodded, signing off on the load distribution documents without looking up. "Weight and balance within parameters." "Yes, ma'am. Center of gravity is textbook perfect. These guys know what they're doing." Davis gestured toward the cargo specialists who were securing the final pallets with practiced expertise. "Should be a smooth flight. Weather looks good most of the way, just some moderate turbulence over the Atlantic around Iceland." "Sounds good. Tell everyone we're wheels up in 45 minutes. Rachel's voice carried the calm, unremarkable tone of someone who had flown this route dozens of times before. She had, of course, but not for the reasons anyone thought. In the crew briefing room, First Officer Lieutenant Mark Patterson reviewed the flight plan while sipping coffee from a paper cup. He had flown with Rachel for 6 months now and found her to be exactly what her reputation suggested: competent, thorough, methodical, and completely professional. She flew by the book, never took unnecessary risks, and treated every flight with the same careful attention to detail. Patterson had checked her background once out of curiosity and found what he expected: civilian flight training at a reputable school in Arizona, years of flying cargo routes for a major freight company, then military contract work flying transports. Standard career progression for cargo pilots. Nothing remarkable, nothing flashy, just solid experience and clean records. "Ready for another milk run across the pond?" Patterson asked when Rachel entered the briefing room, carrying her flight bag and travel mug. Rachel smiled slightly. "They're all important missions, Mark. Those supplies mean something to someone, and those 300 people have families waiting for them in Germany." "True enough," Patterson agreed, appreciating her professionalism. "Weather's looking decent. Should be about 8 hours to Ramstein with our load." The flight engineer, Master Sergeant Tony Richards, joined them for the final briefing. Richards was a 30-year Air Force veteran who had worked on everything from C-130s to C-5 Galaxies. He knew transport aircraft inside and out, and he ran his pre-flight checks with meticulous attention. "All systems nominal," he reported. "Engines 1 through 4 showing perfect parameters, hydraulics are solid, electrical systems all green. She's ready to fly." Rachel studied the weather reports one final time, noting the jet stream patterns and the forecast turbulence zones. Her eyes moved across the data with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of reading atmospheric conditions, though everyone assumed she was just being thorough like any cargo pilot would be. "Look straight forward," she said finally. "Let's get our passengers comfortable and get this bird in the air." The boarding process took 20 minutes as the military personnel filed onto the aircraft, most of them young soldiers and airmen heading to assignments in Europe, along with support staff and a few officers. They settled into the uncomfortable cargo webbing seats that lined both sides of the aircraft's interior, surrounded by secured pallets of supplies and equipment. The massive cargo bay smelled of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the distinctive metallic tang of military hardware. Most of the passengers pulled out phones or tablets for the long flight, while others simply closed their eyes, preparing to sleep through the journey. In the cockpit, Rachel and Patterson worked through the startup procedures with practiced coordination. The four Pratt & Whitney F-117 turbofan engines came to life one by one, their combined 170,000 pounds of thrust turning the propellers into blurred circles of power. The aircraft trembled slightly as each engine reached operational speed, the familiar vibration that cargo pilots felt in their bones. Travis Tower, Reach 742 requesting taxi clearance for runway 21 right, Patterson called over the radio. Reach 742, cleared to taxi runway 21 right via taxiway Bravo. Wind 020 at 8 knots, altimeter 3012. Rachel guided the massive aircraft forward with gentle throttle adjustments, the C-17's sophisticated fly-by-wire system responding smoothly to her inputs. The big transport moved with surprising grace for its size, though it took careful attention to maneuver its 174-foot length around the tight corners of the taxiway. Behind them, 300 people and 65 tons of cargo rode along, completely unaware of the pilot at the controls or her carefully hidden past. 15 minutes later, Reach 742 lined up on the runway. Rachel pushed the throttles forward, feeling the four engines spool up to full power. The C-17 accelerated down the concrete, the runway lights blurring past as the airspeed indicator climbed. At 140 knots, Rachel pulled back gently on the yoke, and the nose wheel lifted smoothly off the ground. Seconds later, the main landing gear left the runway, and the massive transport climbed into the brightening morning sky. "Gear up," Rachel commanded, and Patterson selected the landing gear lever to the up position. The familiar thunk of the gear doors closing signaled their transition from ground operations to flight. After takeoff checklist. They worked through the procedures methodically as the aircraft climbed through 5,000 feet, then 10,000, leaving the California coast behind and heading out over the Pacific before turning northeast toward their transatlantic route. The sky lightened from deep blue to pale azure as the sun rose behind them, painting the clouds below in shades of pink and gold. Reach 742, contact Oakland Center on 124.3, the tower controller instructed. 124.3, good day, Patterson replied, switching frequencies. The flight settled into routine. At 33,000 feet, cruising at 450 knots, the C-17 carved a smooth path through the morning air. Rachel monitored the instruments with practiced eyes while Patterson handled radio communications and navigation updates. Richards periodically checked systems and fuel consumption, everything running exactly as expected. In the cargo bay, most of the passengers had fallen asleep or were absorbed in their devices, the steady drone of the engines creating a background white noise that made conversation difficult. 3 hours into the flight, somewhere over the black waters of the North Atlantic between Greenland and Iceland, the first indication of trouble appeared as a barely noticeable vibration in the control yoke. Rachel frowned slightly, her hands registering the subtle change before her conscious mind fully processed it. She glanced at the engine instruments, seeing nothing unusual, then checked the flight control system displays. "Mark, you feeling that?" she asked quietly. Patterson looked up from his tablet where he had been reviewing approach procedures for Ramstein. "Feeling what?" "Slight vibration. Might be turbulence starting earlier than forecast." But even as she said it, Rachel's instincts told her something different. The vibration had a mechanical quality that didn't match atmospheric disturbance. Her eyes scanned the instrument panel again, this time with the kind of focused intensity that went beyond standard cargo pilot training, though she kept her expression calm. Richards noticed her attention and leaned forward to check his own instruments. "Everything looks normal from here, Captain. All systems showing green." Then the master caution light illuminated with an insistent amber glow, accompanied by a warning chime. Rachel's eyes snapped to the alert display as multiple messages cascaded across the screen. Engine 2 was showing unusual vibration readings. Before anyone could react, a second alert appeared for Engine 4, then hydraulic pressure warnings began flashing for System A. Engine 2 showing high vibration, Patterson called out, his voice tight. Engine 4 following it. What the hell? Rachel's hands moved across the controls with sudden precision, pulling back Engine 2's throttle slightly while monitoring the vibration levels. Tony, talk to me about hydraulics. Richards was already bringing up detailed system displays. System A pressure dropping. We're losing fluid somewhere. System B and C still nominal, but if this continues. The aircraft shuddered violently, and a tremendous bang echoed through the airframe. In the cargo bay, passengers jerked awake, several shouting in alarm. The master warning light blazed red as Engine 2's display showed catastrophic failure. Rachel immediately shut down the engine and activated its fire suppression system, her hands moving through procedures that most cargo pilots would have to reference in a manual. Engine 2 failure, fire suppression activated, she announced, her voice deadly calm despite the emergency. Mark, declare emergency with Gander Center. Tony, I need full systems assessment now. Patterson keyed the radio with shaking hands. Gander Center, reach 742 declaring emergency. We have an uncontained engine failure, 300 souls on board, declaring minimum fuel in case we need priority handling for any diversion. Before the controller could respond, Engine 4 exploded. The detonation sent shrapnel tearing through the right wing and aft fuselage, shredding hydraulic lines and electrical conduits. The aircraft rolled violently to the right as the flight control system lost redundancy. Warning lights and alarms filled the cockpit with a cacophony of electronic panic. The C-17 dropped 2,000 feet in seconds as Rachel fought the controls. In that moment, something changed in Rachel Morgan's eyes. The calm cargo pilot disappeared, replaced by something harder, sharper, more dangerous. Her hands stopped treating the aircraft like a heavy transport and started flying it like something else entirely. She stomped hard on the left rudder while simultaneously pushing the left wing down with aileron, using asymmetric thrust and the remaining flight controls to arrest the roll. The massive aircraft groaned under the stress, but it stabilized, though now flying in a severe right wing down attitude that would have terrified most pilots. Multiple hydraulic failures, Richards shouted over the alarms. System A and B both gone. We're on System C only. Flight controls are degraded to manual reversion backup mode. Rachel's mind processed the emergency with computer-like speed, running through options faster than conscious thought. Manual reversion mode meant the fly-by-wire system had defaulted to direct mechanical linkages with minimal computer assistance. Flying a C-17 in this configuration was like trying to steer a dump truck with a shovel. The aircraft became heavy, sluggish, requiring constant input to maintain even basic control. Add to that 2 failed engines on the same side, structural damage, and 300 lives in the back, and the situation became mathematically impossible for survival. Except Rachel Morgan had spent years learning to solve impossible equations. Mark, shut down Engine 4, fire suppression, she ordered, her voice carrying a new edge of absolute command. Then I need you on Engine 1 and 3 throttles. I'm going to need constant power adjustments to keep us stable. Captain, we need to ditch, Patterson said, panic creeping into his voice. We're over the North Atlantic. We can't make it to land on 2 engines with this much damage. We're not ditching, Rachel said flatly. The tone carried such absolute certainty that Patterson fell silent, staring at her. Tony, reroute all available electrical power to flight control systems. Shut down anything non-essential. Mark, I need you to focus. We're going to fly this airplane to Keflavik, Iceland. That's 400 miles. Patterson protested. Captain, we're flying on 2 engines with manual reversion controls. The book says. The book doesn't cover this, Rachel interrupted, and for the first time, Patterson saw something in her eyes that made him realize he had never really known his aircraft commander at all. Trust me. I can fly this. But I need you both working with me. Her hands moved across the controls with a fluidity that seemed impossible given the aircraft's degraded state. She was feeling the airplane through the yoke and rudder pedals, sensing the aerodynamic forces, anticipating the aircraft's responses before they happened. Small, precise control inputs kept the damaged C-17 from falling into an uncontrolled roll, each movement calculated to work with the airplane's new, damaged configuration rather than fighting against it. Gander Center, Reach 742, Patterson transmitted, his voice steadier now. We have lost engine 2 and 4, multiple hydraulic failures, flight controls in manual reversion. 300 souls on board. Requesting vectors to Keflavik and immediate emergency services notification. Reach 742, Gander Center copies your emergency. Turn left heading 045 degrees for Keflavik. Distance 380 nautical miles. Keflavik has been notified and is preparing for your arrival. Descend and maintain flight level 250. Rachel shook her head sharply. Negative on the descent, Gander. I'm maintaining altitude until I have the runway in sight. We'll be flying a continuous descent approach from overhead the field. Patterson looked at her in confusion. A continuous descent approach from overhead? That was a combat tactical approach, something fighter pilots used to avoid ground fire, not something transport aircraft did. But before he could question it, Rachel was already explaining. If we descend now, we lose potential energy we can't get back with only 2 engines, she said, her hands making constant minute adjustments to keep the aircraft flying. We'll glide it in if we have to, but I want as much altitude as possible until we're directly over the runway. Tony, how's our fuel state? Richards checked the gauges, his face grim. Engines 2 and 4 both lost fuel before shutdown. We're leaking from the right wing tanks. I'm showing 17,000 pounds remaining and dropping. That's maybe 90 minutes at our current consumption rate if the leak doesn't get worse. More than enough, Rachel said with absolute confidence. Mark, I need you to calculate our optimal glide ratio. If we lose both remaining engines, I need to know our energy state for every mile we fly. Patterson stared at her. Captain, how do you know? Just do it, Rachel cut him off, then her voice softened slightly. Please. Trust me. The next hour was a masterclass in precision flying that neither Patterson nor Richards had ever witnessed. Rachel flew the crippled C-17 as if it were an extension of her own body, making constant adjustments to compensate for the asymmetric thrust, the damaged wing, and the degraded flight controls. She flew not by looking at instruments primarily, but by feeling the airplane, sensing its energy state and momentum through subtle feedback in the controls. It was the kind of flying that couldn't be learned in transport school, the kind that required thousands of hours in high-performance aircraft where every control input mattered, where a single mistake meant instant death. The passengers in the cargo bay knew something was seriously wrong. The violent shudders from the engine failures had woken everyone, and the severe bank angle the aircraft maintained was deeply unsettling. Several people were sick, others prayed, many just sat in terrified silence. But through it all, they felt something else too, the steady, controlled movements of the aircraft. Despite the emergency, despite the alarms they could hear faintly from the cockpit, someone was flying this airplane with absolute authority. 2 F-22 Raptor fighters had been scrambled from Keflavik the moment Reach 742 declared its emergency. The stealth fighters climbed to altitude rapidly, their advanced radar systems locating the crippled transport nearly 200 miles away. Major Kyle, Blade, Morrison and Captain Jennifer, Torch, Chin accelerated to supersonic speed, closing the distance in minutes before throttling back to match the C-17 speed. Reach 742, Torch 11 flight is on your right side, 5 o'clock position, Morrison transmitted. We're here to provide escort and relay any communications you need. Rachel keyed the radio, her voice calm despite managing constant control inputs. Torch 11, Reach 742. Appreciate the escort. Situation is stable but critical. 2 engines out on the right side, multiple hydraulic failures, manual reversion flight controls. 300 souls on board. Intend continuous descent approach from overhead Keflavik. Morrison exchanged glances with Chen in the other F-22. A continuous descent approach in a damaged transport. That took serious skill and confidence. Roger that, Reach. We'll stay with you all the way in. Do you need us to verify any damage from external inspection? Affirmative, Torch. Tell me what you see on the right wing and aft fuselage. The two F-22s separated, one sliding in close on each side of the transport. Morrison flew within 50 feet of the damaged C-17, close enough to see the shredded metal where Engine 2 had disintegrated, the torn aluminum skin on the right wing, and the hydraulic fluid streaming from ruptured lines. Reach, Torch 1-1. You've got significant damage to the right wing, looks like shrapnel penetration in multiple locations. I can see hydraulic fluid leaking. Engine 2 mount is pretty much gone, and your Engine 4 is missing several cowling panels. Honestly, I'm impressed you're still flying. Copy that, Torch. Nothing I can do about it now except fly what I've got, Rachel replied, then added. How's the vertical stabilizer look? I'm feeling some lateral instability. Chen answered from the other F-22. Torch 1-2 here. I can see some buckled skin on the vertical stab, probably from the engine explosions. Structural integrity looks okay, but you might have some aerodynamic disturbance there. Explains the rudder response, Rachel muttered to herself, then transmitted. Thanks for the eyes, Torch flight. Gander, Reach 742 is 200 miles from Keflavik, requesting weather and runway advisory. As the miles slowly passed, Rachel nursed the crippled aircraft through the air. Every minute was a victory, every mile forward a small miracle of precision flying. Patterson had stopped questioning her decisions and was simply following her instructions, adjusting throttles on her command, managing systems as she directed. Richards monitored every gauge and indicator with obsessive attention, calling out any changes before they became critical. The F-22 pilot stayed in formation, watching in professional awe as the damaged transport maintained controlled flight through what should have been an unrecoverable emergency. Morrison had been flying fighters for 15 years and had seen plenty of skilled pilots, but something about the way this cargo pilot was managing the impossible situation struck him as unusual. The smoothness of the control inputs, the way the transport moved through the air despite its damage, it suggested someone with experience far beyond typical cargo operations. Torch, how long you been flying F-22s? Rachel asked suddenly over the radio, her voice conversational despite still fighting the aircraft every second. Morrison blinked in surprise at the casual question during an emergency. About 6 years, ma'am. Flew F-16s before that. Good aircraft, the 16. Light, responsive, honest handling, Rachel commented, then added almost to herself, though nothing quite flies like a Hornet. Something in that statement made Morrison's pilot instincts tingle. The way she said it, the specific reference to F-18 Hornet handling characteristics, it was too knowledgeable, too familiar. He glanced at his display showing Reach 742's call sign and aircraft commander designation. Morgan, our captain. For the first time, it occurred to him to actually check the pilot's background beyond just the immediate emergency information. He pulled up the military database on his knee display while maintaining formation, running a search on the aircraft commander. Captain Rachel Morgan, current assignment military contract transport pilot. Previous civilian cargo operations with Atlas Air. Previous civilian flight training Arizona Regional Flight Center. He was about to close the search when something caught his eye. Previous military service, United States Navy, 1999 to 2015. Rank at separation, Commander. Primary aircraft, F-18 Super Hornet. Morrison's breath caught. He ran a more detailed search, and the screen filled with information that made his pulse accelerate. Commander Rachel, Ghost, Morgan. Naval Aviator. Top Gun graduate, class of 2003. Graduated first in class. Combat deployments, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. Air Medals, Distinguished Flying Cross, Navy Cross for actions during close air support mission over Helmand Province where she maintained air coverage for surrounded ground forces despite being shot down, evading capture, and coordinating her own rescue. Total flight hours in F/18, 4,300 hours. Fighter Squadron Commander. Carrier Qualifications, USS Abraham Lincoln, USS Theodore Roosevelt, USS Carl Vinson. Holy! Morrison whispered, then keyed his radio with shaking hands. Reach 742, Torch 11. Captain Morgan, can I confirm your previous aircraft type? There was a long pause before Rachel answered, her voice carefully neutral. That's not really relevant to the current emergency, Torch. Ma'am, it's very relevant, Morrison replied, respect filling his voice. Commander Morgan, callsign Ghost, Top Gun class of 2003. First in class. Is that you flying that transport right now? In the C-17 cockpit, Patterson and Richards both turned to stare at Rachel with shocked expressions. She kept her eyes forward, hands steady on the controls, but her jaw tightened slightly. That was a different life, Major. I'm just a cargo pilot now. Just a cargo pilot? Morrison's voice carried pure admiration. Ma'am, you're flying a crippled transport on 2 engines with manual reversion controls while maintaining perfect energy management and executing tactical approach procedures. That's not just cargo pilot flying. That's fighter pilot skills applied to transport operations. Chen, pull up Ghost's jacket. In the other F-22, Captain Chen ran the same search Morrison had done, her eyes widening as the information appeared. She keyed her radio, her voice full of awe. Commander Morgan, this is Torch 12. Your service record is incredible. Why are you flying cargo? Rachel exhaled slowly, still fighting the damaged aircraft every second while this conversation happened around her. Because after 16 years of combat flying, I wanted to do something quieter. Cargo doesn't shoot back, doesn't require me to drop weapons on people, doesn't involve watching friends die. It's honest work, moving supplies and people safely. That's enough for me. But you're clearly still one of the best pilots in the sky, Morrison said. The way you're handling that damaged bird, that's not something that goes away. Skills don't disappear, Rachel agreed, then her voice hardened slightly. But priorities change. I'm not Ghost anymore. I'm Captain Morgan, and right now I need to focus on getting 300 people on the ground safely. Can we continue this conversation after I land this airplane? Roger that, ma'am, Morrison replied, properly chastised. Torch Flight will maintain escort. But the word was already spreading. Morrison had transmitted Rachel's identification over the secure military frequency that connected them back to Keflavik Operations Center. Within minutes, personnel at the base were pulling up her service record, passing the information up the chain of command. The emergency response team preparing for Reach 742's arrival learned they were dealing not just with a damaged aircraft, but with a legendary naval aviator who had won the Navy Cross and graduated top of her Top Gun class. The information spread through the Tactical Operations Center like wildfire. At 100 miles from Keflavik, Rachel began her descent planning. Mark, Tony, we're going to do this in one approach. No go-arounds, no second chances. When I start down, we're committed. One approach. Patterson's voice cracked slightly. Captain, shouldn't we give ourselves multiple options? With 2 engines and degraded controls, every approach costs energy we can't afford to waste, Rachel explained patiently. We'll maintain altitude until directly overhead the field, then execute a tactical descent that puts us on the runway with minimum maneuvering. I've done it before in fighters. The physics work the same, just bigger and slower. Richards cleared his throat. Commander Morgan, is it true you graduated first at Top Gun? Rachel smiled slightly despite the intense concentration required to fly. Tony, you've been flying with me for 2 years. Why does it matter now? Because now I understand why you always seem to know exactly where the airplane was going before it got there, Richard said simply. You've been flying like a fighter pilot the whole time. We just didn't recognize it. Fighter pilot skills, cargo pilot application, Rachel corrected. The mission is what matters. Right now, the mission is getting everyone home safely. The F-22 stayed in formation as the damaged C-17 approached Keflavik. The Iceland coastline appeared on the horizon, rugged volcanic terrain meeting dark ocean waters. Rachel ran through her approach plan one final time in her mind, visualizing the descent profile, the energy management, the final approach parameters. It was exactly the kind of tactical thinking she had learned at Top Gun 2 decades ago, applied now to a 400,000-pound transport aircraft instead of a fighter. Keflavik Tower, Reach 742 is 50 miles northeast, preparing for overhead approach, Rachel transmitted. Request winds, altimeter, and runway advisory. Reach 742, Keflavik Tower. Wind 320 at 15 gusting 22, altimeter 2987. Runway 31 is available, 10,000 feet long. All emergency equipment is standing by. You're cleared for the approach, pilot's discretion. Cleared for approach, Reach 742, Rachel acknowledged. Then over the intercom to the passengers and back, attention all personnel, this is the pilot. We will be landing in approximately 15 minutes. The approach will be steeper and faster than normal due to our emergency configuration. Ensure all seatbelts are secured and prepare for a firm landing. Remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. Her voice was so calm, so confident, that many of the terrified passengers felt their fear diminish slightly. Someone who sounded like that, who flew with that kind of steady control, must know what they were doing. They didn't know they were listening to one of the finest fighter pilots the Navy had ever produced, but they could sense the absolute competence in her words. At 20 miles, Rachel began configuring for landing. Flaps 15, she ordered, and Patterson selected the flap lever. The massive wing panels extended partially, changing the aircraft's lift characteristics. Rachel immediately adjusted the trim and power settings to compensate, keeping the aircraft balanced and stable. Landing gear down, she commanded at 10 miles. You want the gear down this far out? Patterson questioned. Drag management, Rachel explained tersely. I need to control our descent rate precisely. The gear gives me a predictable drag increase. Trust me. Patterson selected the landing gear lever down. The hydraulic system labored with only one functioning hydraulic system, but eventually 3 green lights illuminated confirming all landing gear down and locked. The added drag immediately began to slow the aircraft, and Rachel adjusted power to maintain her desired descent profile. The 2 F-22s had dropped back slightly to give the transport room to maneuver. Morrison and Chen watched with professional fascination as Rachel brought the crippled C-17 directly over Keflavik Airport at 8,000 feet, then began a descending spiral that no transport pilot would ever attempt. She literally flew the aircraft in a continuous spiraling descent, maintaining precise control of airspeed and descent rate while the massive transport corkscrewed down through the air like a fighter in a combat descent. She's flying it like a hornet, Chen breathed over the intercom to Morrison. That's a tactical descent pattern. She's Ghost, Morrison replied simply. What did you expect? Rachel kept her eyes moving constantly between the instruments and the visual picture outside. The runway appeared below, growing larger as they descended through 6,000 feet, then 4,000, then 2,000. Her hands made constant small corrections to keep the descent profile exactly where she wanted it. The passengers in back felt the unusual spiral but also felt the smooth control, the precision of the descent. They didn't understand what they were experiencing, but they knew someone was flying this airplane with absolute mastery. At 1,000 feet, Rachel rolled the wings level and pointed the nose directly at runway 31. The airplane was traveling faster than normal approach speed, but she needed the extra energy to maintain control authority with the degraded flight controls. The threshold markers rushed toward them. 500 feet, Patterson called out, his voice tight. 200 feet, Richards added. Rachel's hands moved in final adjustments. Power reduction on engines 1 and 3. Slight nose-up pitch to arrest the descent. The runway threshold passed beneath them. The massive C-17 floated for just a moment, then Rachel pulled the throttles to idle and gently pulled back on the yoke. The main landing gear touched the runway with a solid but controlled thump, then the nose gear settled down. She immediately deployed the thrust reversers on the 2 working engines and stepped on the brakes. The crippled transport roared down the runway, thrust reversers screaming, brakes heating up rapidly. 10,000 feet of concrete passed beneath them as Rachel fought to stop the aircraft before running out of runway. The airspeed indicator wound down, 100 knots, 80 knots, 60 knots. With 2,000 feet of runway remaining, the aircraft finally rolled to a complete stop. In the cargo bay, 300 people erupted in cheers and applause. Many were crying, others were hugging, some just sat in shocked silence that they were actually alive and on the ground. The impossible had happened. They had survived. Rachel sat motionless in the pilot's seat for a moment, hands still on the controls, feeling the aircraft settle on its landing gear. Then she exhaled slowly and began the shutdown procedures. Mark, Tony, shut down engines 1 and 3. Parking brake set. Secure all systems. Her hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. Patterson and Richards worked through the shutdown checklist in stunned silence, still processing what they had just experienced. Outside the cockpit windows, they could see emergency vehicles surrounding the aircraft, firefighters in protective gear approaching cautiously even though there was no fire. Captain Morgan, Patterson finally said, his voice hoarse. That was. I don't even have words for what that was. That was good crew coordination, Rachel said simply. You both did exactly what I needed when I needed it. That's why we're all alive. No, Richard said firmly. We're all alive because you flew this airplane like no cargo pilot could have. Commander Morgan, why did you hide this? Why didn't you ever tell us about your background? Rachel unstrapped from her seat and stood up, her legs slightly unsteady from the adrenaline drain. Because I didn't want to be Ghost anymore. I wanted to be just another pilot flying cargo. That Navy Cross and Top Gun trophy didn't make me a better person, Tony. They just meant I was really good at something I don't want to do anymore. Fighting, killing, combat flying, I left that behind. Or I thought I did. She looked out at the emergency vehicles and the passengers starting to evacuate through the cargo bay. Today I'm just grateful those skills were still there when I needed them. When 300 people needed them. Outside the aircraft, the F-22s had landed and taxied to the transient parking area. Morrison and Chen quickly completed their shutdown procedures and headed toward the C-17, still surrounded by emergency crews. They arrived just as Rachel climbed down the crew ladder, Patterson and Richards following her. Morrison snapped to attention and saluted sharply. Commander Morgan, ma'am. Major Kyle Morrison, 57th Fighter Squadron. Permission to say it's an absolute honor to have flown with you today. Rachel returned the salute automatically, old muscle memory taking over. At ease, Major. I'm not a commander anymore. Just Captain Morgan, cargo pilot. With respect, ma'am, there's no just about what we witnessed today, Chen said, joining them. Captain Jennifer Chen. I've been flying fighters for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone handle an aircraft the way you handled that damaged transport. The tactical descent, the energy management, the precision, that was fighter pilot excellence applied to an impossible situation. A crowd was forming. The passengers who had evacuated from the C-17 were gathering at a distance, many of them wanting to see the pilots who had saved their lives. Base personnel who had heard about Commander Ghost Morgan's identity were approaching, senior officers and aviation personnel who wanted to meet the legend. The base commander, Colonel James Peterson, pushed through the crowd. Commander Morgan, Peterson said, offering his hand. Colonel Peterson, Base Commander. I pulled your service record when we learned who was flying that emergency aircraft. Your reputation precedes you, ma'am. The way you handled that approach was textbook tactical flying. There aren't 10 pilots in the entire Air Force who could have done what you just did. Rachel shook his hand, uncomfortable with the attention. I appreciate that, Colonel, but I was just doing my job. Any pilot would have. No, ma'am, they wouldn't have, Morrison interrupted gently. Most pilots would have ditched in the ocean and hoped for rescue. You saved 300 lives by flying a damaged aircraft beyond its supposed capabilities. That's not any pilot. That's exceptional airmanship informed by exceptional training and experience. One of the passengers, a young Army sergeant, approached hesitantly. Captain Morgan. I just wanted to say, thank you. I have a wife and 2 kids at home. Because of you, I get to see them again. I don't know what happened up in that cockpit, but I know you saved all of us. Rachel's expression softened. Sergeant, I'm glad you're safe. That's what matters. Go call your family. Let them know you're okay. As more passengers approached to offer thanks, Rachel realized she couldn't hide anymore. Her carefully maintained cover as just another cargo pilot had been stripped away by the emergency, by the F-22 pilots recognizing her tactical flying, by her service record being discovered. Ghost had been revealed. But looking at the faces of the 300 people she had saved, seeing their gratitude and relief, Rachel understood something important. She hadn't left her skills behind when she left the Navy. She had just redirected them toward a different mission. Protecting lives didn't require combat anymore. It required exactly what she had done today, applying every bit of training and experience towards saving people rather than fighting enemies. Morrison stepped closer, speaking quietly so only Rachel could hear. Commander, there's something you should know. Your call sign, Ghost, it's legendary in the fighter community. Even pilots who never flew with you know the stories. The mission over Helmand Province where you provided close air support for 18 hours straight, protecting ground forces surrounded by enemy fighters. The carrier landing in 20-foot seas after taking battle damage. The ACM engagement where you defended a strike package against superior numbers. You're the pilot other fighter pilots want to be like. Rachel smiled slightly, sadly. That was a long time ago, Major. Different person, different life. Same person, Morrison corrected gently. Same incredible pilot. You just found a different way to use those skills. But today, when it mattered most, Ghost came back. 300 people are alive because the best fighter pilot of her generation was flying that cargo plane. Later that evening, after the investigation teams had begun examining the damaged C-17, after the passengers had been accommodated in base housing, after the immediate crisis was resolved, Rachel sat alone in the base operations center nursing a cup of coffee. The adrenaline had long since faded, replaced by exhaustion and the familiar mental replaying of every decision during the emergency. Patterson and Richards found her there. They sat down without asking permission, and for a long moment, none of them spoke. I looked up your service record, Patterson finally said. Everything. The missions, the medals, the combat deployments. You've lived 3 lifetimes worth of flying excellence, and I've been sitting next to you for 6 months treating you like just another cargo pilot. I feel like an idiot. Don't, Rachel said firmly. I wanted to be treated like just another cargo pilot. That was the whole point. I didn't want the reputation, the expectations, the constant reminders of who I used to be. But today you had to be Ghost again, Richards observed. How did that feel? Rachel considered the question carefully. Necessary. Natural. Terrifying. All of those at once. I didn't want to rely on those skills again, but when 300 lives were on the line, I didn't have the luxury of wanting to be someone else. I had to be the pilot who could actually save them. And you did, Patterson said quietly. Commander, I will never forget what you did today. The way you flew that approach, the calm in your voice, the absolute confidence in your decisions, you showed me what real aviator excellence looks like. We all worked together, Rachel insisted. You and Tony executed perfectly under impossible pressure. That's crew coordination. That's what saved us. Led by a legendary fighter pilot who applied her Top Gun training to flying a damaged transport, Richards added with a slight smile. I'm just glad I was there to see it. Even if I was terrified the entire time. The next morning, Reach 742's passengers gathered for a final briefing before their alternate transportation to Germany was arranged. Rachel stood off to the side, hoping to avoid attention, but Colonel Peterson had other plans. He called her forward to address the group. Folks, I want you to meet Captain Rachel Morgan, the pilot who brought you safely to Iceland yesterday, Peterson announced. The room burst into applause that lasted several minutes. Rachel stood uncomfortably at the front, nodding in acknowledgement. When the applause finally died down, Peterson continued. What most of you don't know is that Captain Morgan is actually Commander Rachel Morgan, United States Navy retired, callsign Ghost. She graduated first in her class at Top Gun, flew combat missions in multiple theaters, earned the Navy Cross for Valor, and accumulated over 4,000 hours in F-18 Super Hornets before retiring and transitioning to civilian cargo operations. The room fell silent as this information sank in. Then the young Army sergeant who had thanked Rachel the day before stood up. Ma'am, you're telling us that one of the best fighter pilots in American history was flying our cargo plane? And she saved us using skills from flying combat jets? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Sergeant, Peterson confirmed. When those engines failed, you had possibly the most qualified person in the world to handle that emergency sitting in the pilot's seat. Ghost didn't just save you, she did something that most aviation experts are saying was impossible. Another passenger, an Air Force captain, raised her hand. Commander Morgan, why were you flying cargo? With your qualifications, you could be flying anything. Rachel stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I flew combat missions for 16 years. I loved flying, loved the Navy, loved my squadron. But I got tired of the weight of life and death decisions, of deploying away from home, of losing friends to enemy fire and accidents. When I retired, I wanted simplicity. Cargo flying gave me that. No weapons, no combat, just moving things safely from point A to point B. It was enough. She paused, looking around the room at the 300 faces watching her. Yesterday showed me that skills don't disappear just because you change careers. When you needed those fighter pilot skills to survive, they were still there. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful we're all here. But I'm still just a cargo pilot who wants to do her job quietly and go home at the end of the day. The Army sergeant stood again. With respect, ma'am, you're more than that. You're a hero. You're Ghost. And 300 of us will never forget that when we needed the best, you were there. The room erupted in applause again, and this time Rachel let herself smile, accepting the gratitude with grace. 3 days later, after the investigation had cleared Rachel of any responsibility for the mechanical failures, after replacement engines had been installed on Reach 742, after all the paperwork and statements were completed, Rachel prepared to fly the repaired aircraft to its destination. Patterson and Richards were cleared to continue as her crew, though now they treated her with a respect bordering on reverence that made her uncomfortable. Before the flight, Major Morrison found her at the aircraft, conducting her pre-flight inspection. Commander Morgan, I wanted to say goodbye before you leave. And to tell you something. Rachel looked up from checking a landing gear assembly. What's that, Major? Your story is already spreading through the fighter community. Ghost's return. The legendary Top Gun pilot who saved 300 lives flying a cargo plane like a fighter. You're inspiring a whole new generation of aviators to understand that excellence in flying transcends aircraft type or mission. It's about mastery, about understanding the physics and the art, about never giving up on saving lives. Rachel stood, wiping her hands on a rag. Major, I'm not trying to inspire anyone. I just want to fly cargo and be left alone. Morrison smiled. I know that, ma'am. But heroes don't get to choose whether they inspire people. They just do it by being who they are. You're Ghost whether you wear a flight suit or civilian clothes, whether you're flying fighters or transports. That excellence is part of who you are. He extended his hand, and Rachel shook it firmly. Fair winds and following seas, Commander. It was an honor flying with you. Likewise, Major. Take care of yourself up there. As Morrison walked away, Rachel returned to her pre-flight inspection, but his words stayed with her. She had tried to leave Ghost behind, to become just another pilot. But maybe that had been the wrong goal. Maybe the point wasn't to abandon her past but to integrate it, to use those hard-won skills in service of a different kind of mission. She thought about the 300 people whose lives she had saved, about how her Top Gun training and fighter pilot instincts had made the difference between survival and disaster. She thought about all the cargo flights ahead, the supplies and people she would move safely across the world. Each flight was important. Each mission mattered. And if being Ghost meant approaching each flight with that level of excellence and commitment, then maybe she could accept that identity again. When Reach 742 lifted off from Keflavik 3 hours later, Rachel flew it with the same precision and care she had always shown, but with a new understanding. She wasn't just a cargo pilot. She was Ghost, applying fighter pilot excellence to transport operations, bringing the highest standards of airmanship to every mission. The aircraft type didn't matter. The mission parameters didn't matter. What mattered was flying with skill, precision, and dedication to protecting every life in her care. Patterson noticed the change immediately, a new confidence in her voice, a clearer sense of purpose in her commands. You seem different, Captain, he observed as they climbed through 20,000 feet. Rachel smiled slightly, her hands steady on the controls. Not different, Mark. Just more complete. I spent 2 years trying to not be something I thought I'd left behind. Now I realize I never left it behind. I just found a new application for it. So you're okay with everyone knowing about Ghost now? Richards asked from the engineer station. I'm okay with being who I actually am, Rachel replied. A pilot who trained at the highest levels of military aviation and now uses those skills to move cargo and people safely around the world. That's not a step down from being a fighter pilot. It's just a different way of serving. The C-17 leveled off at cruising altitude, its 4 engines now purring smoothly after the repairs, carrying its crew and cargo eastward toward Germany. Below them, the North Atlantic stretched endlessly, the same waters where days earlier they had fought for survival. Rachel looked out at the horizon, feeling the solid weight of the aircraft responding to her touch, and understood that she had finally found peace with her past and her present. She was Ghost. She was Commander Rachel Morgan, Top Gun graduate, combat veteran, holder of the Navy Cross. And she was Captain Morgan, cargo pilot, transport aviator, protector of the 300 lives entrusted to her care. All of those identities were true. All of them mattered. And together, they made her exactly who she needed to be. Behind them, 2 F-22 Raptors climbed from Keflavik for a routine patrol, their pilots carrying with them the story of Ghost's return. The legend would spread through ready rooms and squadron spaces, through military aviation communities around the world. Not the story of a retired pilot who came back to glory, but the story of excellence that never faded, skills that never rusted, and dedication to saving lives that transcended rank, aircraft type, or career transitions. 300 people would tell their families and friends about the cargo pilot who saved them using fighter pilot skills. Those stories would multiply, touching thousands of lives with the message that true excellence in any field comes from dedication, training, and the willingness to apply every bit of skill and knowledge when lives depend on it. And Rachel Morgan would continue flying cargo, accepting now that she could be both Ghost and a simple transport pilot, that those identities weren't contradictory but complementary. She had found her peace not by abandoning her past but by integrating it fully into her present, using the pinnacle of fighter pilot training in service of the essential mission of moving people and supplies safely across the world. The horizon stretched ahead, endless and blue, full of flights yet to come and lives yet to protect. Rachel flew toward it with steady hands and calm confidence, carrying with her the lessons of Top Gun, the experience of combat, and the wisdom of knowing that excellence in flying serves the same essential purpose regardless of the aircraft or mission, bringing everyone home safely, every single time. Ghost had returned. And she was exactly where she needed to be.